I come from philosophy of science, and I try to be a little bit engaged with actual science to better comprehend it. And in these years, this especially means the science of the psychology of faces. And this won't be an actual paper. This talk is more like something that occurred to me, and I felt the urge since I was working with face pictures for some months now. I felt the urge to understand what's going on with face pictures, because I felt that there was something about their epistemic status that deserved to be put under a critical scrutiny. So I'm presenting some very scattered reflections here. I apologize for it will be not well ordered and too structured, but I hope we can have some nice discussions sooner or later about this, so that you can maybe help me to make up my mind. So what's the background behind this talk? Now, as I mentioned to some of you, I was running an experiment, okay, on face masks perception, and how face masks, either transparent or standard face masks, alter our perception of faces in COVID time. I was doing so with some psychologists from the here at the bottom, thanks to the help of Roberto Gamboni, which I thank, from Facets team, who helped us to modify the face masks. And now we're doing another experiment, which is in a way an experiment to test the semioticity of the mask. Is partially based on some writings of Massimo about the semiotic surplus of face masks. And I have volunteered to scout for the faces, to look for the stimuli. And to do so, I went through those huge databases of human faces. And this led me to the reflection, because I want to focus better on what's going on, what's the epistemic status of these faces. And since I'm historically minded philosopher of science, I turn back to where it all begins, according to most textbooks. That is to Darwin's the expression of emotions in men and animals. So this talk is made up by two parts. Okay, first one is I want to discuss, to see with you what's going on with face pictures, especially photographs, but also say illustration based on photographs in Darwin's book. And then I want to make a big leap to nowadays. Okay, so the scientific practice I'm also involved in, and what is the status of faces in contemporary databases. Okay, we will see that there will be this continuum, that is a continuum between artificial and natural, and to locate oneself, to check whether a face stands more on the natural side or on the artificial side, will not be as straightforward as we might presume. But let's see what's going on. First, Darwin, the expression of emotions in men and animals. Now, before talking of Darwin's book, which was also mentioned by Simone yesterday, we got to check why Darwin had to write his book. I say had to, because the mainstream view about human facial expressions, and especially the expression of emotion, was a challenge, one of the greatest challenge to his evolutionary view. Okay, so this guy, Sir Charles Bell, who was possibly the most knowledgeable person about human face, because he was an actual physician. He did a lot of autopsy and very nice drawings that were enclosed in his books. You can see one of them here. Well, he claimed that, look, guys, these human faces are so sophisticated. We've got such muscles. They are capable of such sophisticated movements that they're unlike other animals, that the only plausible explanation seems that they have been handcrafted by God, and it was a gift to the man so that we can express our emotions properly. Now, this was a problem for Darwin's evolutionary account. He was looking to fit all the history of the human evolution, well, in an evolutionary framework. So he had to prove false Sir Charles Bell's account. He has a very kind words in his introduction about Charles Bell, but nonetheless, he wished to prove that human faces and their facial movements related to emotion were not something totally different from the remainder of the animal kingdoms, but can be explained as a continuum, a phylogenetical continuum with the remainder of the animal kingdom. So you can see on the left two pictures that illustrate one of his three principles, the principle of serviceable habits. And the take-home message here is that while this woman, okay, figure 22 from the expression of emotions, is grinning, possibly displaying anger, she won't really use these teeth to bite anyone. We don't usually use teeth when we are angered. When we have to fight as humans, we'd rather slap someone or kick someone, but teeth are not a useful weapon. It's okay. Whereas in dogs, picture 14, they use teeth to bite someone. So Darwin's intuition, which is still very popular and convincing nowadays, is that many movements were inherited, okay, from early ancestors that we had in common with those dogs, because these early ancestors, the early mammals, probably used teeth to bite someone. And so now the grin we make when we are angered, prototypically angered, might be a vestige, okay, of an habit that used to be useful. I will skip the other principles because we're not really interested in the contents of Darwin's book, but on the books itself and on the rhetoric of image, if I can say, which it employs in the book. Now, there were three editions of this book. Okay, the first one was published 15 years later, his magnus opus, The Origin of Species, and it was a very popular book. It sold 9,000 copies in 4 months, which is a lot for the time, especially. And then was never was not reprinted as much as other books of similar popularity. But then there was a second edition, which was edited by his son Francis and included some changes. And more relevantly for today's talk, a third edition, okay, was edited by Paul Ekman, who also has been mentioned by Simona yesterday, possibly the most relevant psychologist in the history of human emotion in the 20th century. Okay, and in order to, so to speak, demonstrate that he is the legitimate heir of Darwin, he obtained to be the editor of this book, which can also be seen as a political move. Okay. And the interesting thing of this third edition is that there is a foreword by the art historian Philip Prodger, and this is where I will about the use of photographs and illustrations in the expression, and this is where I will get many of the insights that I will talk you about in the next few slides. Now, it is important to add a little bit of context. Back when the first edition was published by John Murray, this was one of the first books ever to include photographical illustrations. Of course, former books had a lot of drawings and the like, but drawings based on photographs, as in Darwin's book, were relatively recent invention, and their status was still to be bargained, I would say, to be determined and stipulated. He spent like 3 years, a lot of time, to find the proper images, and he got images from 5 photographers and artists. And we got to notice, following Prodger, that the guy who is credited to have introduced photography in England, Talbot, 30 years before, thought of photography as a mean to do science. Okay, because look, you got stuff to see, you can provide evidence, stable intersubjective evidence. But the truth is, as Progger notes, that the technological limitations of the camera at the time were made it very unfit to provide scientific evidence of any sort. I mean, you got to stay there. There are long exposition time. You need to develop whatever comes out from these early cameras straight away. So you need a kind of a lab. That's not an easy task, and you cannot do science until very recently. So I had to. I'm try to study the status of photography to check what distinguished them from drawings, so to speak. And to do so, I have read some epistemologists of images, okay, standing in between of philosophy of art and aesthetics and epistemology. And I isolated some interesting claims. On the one hand, it looks like photographs we are in are somehow more trustworthy, okay? These guys, Meshkin and Cohen, claim that we are inclined to trust them in a way that we are not inclined to trust even the most accurate of drawings and paintings. Why? Because photographs have the two following relevant properties. The third one we will see later. They are transparent, according to the philosopher Kendall Walton. Okay, so to Walton, we do not see a representation of things via photography. When you look at a photography of Marco Viola, you're not seeing a representation of Marco Viola. You're seeing Marco Viola himself, although perhaps this is Marco Viola at a certain time. Here I was 10 years younger and many kilograms slimmer, but still you're directly perceiving me if there's a photo involved, okay? And another philosopher more recently claimed that they provide perceptual knowledge, okay? So transparent and perceptual and sources for perceptual knowledge, unlike drawings that as they are mediated, so they can be affected by bias from the drawer, can only provide testimonial knowledge. And in our philosophical tradition, but most importantly, in our folk intuition, in our even before a conscious intuition, we tend to trust the senses on average more than we tend to trust people. And since drawings requires both sources of knowledge, senses, I need to see the picture, and testimony, and who knows if the people witnessing something is reliable, who knows if she or he was biased, and so on. So there is less noise involved in photographs. It's okay. That's a short way to put it, but we can come back later for more. So these two properties were in some sense were at play in Darwin's use of photographies in his book. A little aside, I used to see a problem like this back when I cared about neuroscience, because there was a nice debate in philosophy of neuroscience about the status of neuroimages. You know, the pictures of the brain you sometimes see in articles and the like. And there were this paper from Castle and from McCabe and Castle that showed its little experiment showing that people tend to trust scientific information more if the very same scientific information is provided along with some brain scan. And so philosopher Dina Roskis reflected, why do people seem to treat neuroimages as photographs? They tend to believe stuff if they see a picture of the brain, but are they really picture of the brain? Do they really deserve the same epistemic status of a trustable source that we tend to assign, willing or not, to photographs? Well, the long answer will require a lecture on the fMRI that will be extremely boring and long, so I'll skip it. This is just the drawing I use when I try to explain how many steps are involved in fMRI. And the short answer that we care about is no. But in some sense, new images inspire me to think that some images can sort of mimic some may involuntarily perhaps resemble photographs, and in so doing, they sort of acquire a rhetorical power that they won't have if we really knew about how artifactual they are. Okay, they seem more mediated, more spontaneous, and this is the case I want to claim is happening also in Darwin's book and in his use of illustration. Now, I'm not claiming that Darwin tries to deceive us, but there is not need to have an explicit desire to deceive. You sometimes can suggest some inferences. You can fail to notice. I think that is the case for Darwin, and still you can prompt people in this case to think that photographs that he used for illustrations, okay, photographs and illustration based on to mimic photographs are perceived as evidence. Also because Protger says in the early decades of photography, the distinction between the evidential status and the illustration status of photographs was still not really explicit and well developed. And so, to give a few examples, uh, how do you get such a picture? That's very funny. How do you get some photographs of this man? Recall, there's the problem of exposition time, and to grasp something so quick as the expression of emotion, which only takes prototypically 4 or 5 seconds, like you cannot do that with this camera. They need 1 minute or so, depending on the light. And how could Darwin get some drawings that are still based on picture of this man? There are also pictures. Well, the response is that they are not a picture of a normal healthy man. They are picture actually coming from Duchenne de Boulogne, that was an anatomist working in a mental clinic, and Duchenne kind of imposed electrodes on this man with facial paralysis to elicit exactly the very movements of to produce the very facial displays he was willing to produce. It's okay, but so now this opens a big problem, okay, because these photographs and illustration based on photographs are get their electrodes removed during the production of the book, but they are presented as if they are displaying the genuine emotional display we do in real time. There is a big problem of representativity because they are highly artifactual, okay, even though they come from a photographic meaning, although there is a post-production canceling it. And an interesting thing to notice is that sometimes this artifactuality jumps in even unbeknown to Darwin. It's okay. In this case, this was another woman in a mental ill clinic, and by scouting into Darwin's archives, Paul Ekman found out that the illustration that was built to resemble the photographs that Darwin asked an artist to, to, to do to make it easier to print, the instructions that Darwin gave to the artist were not to add the wrinkles. The wrinkles, Ekman claims, are added by the artist because they reflect their the artist's own prejudice about how a mental ill woman should look like. It's okay. So that poses a big problem, okay, for reliability. Last case, the photographer who gave more pictures to Darwin was this great guy, Oscar Gustav Rylander. Okay, unlike Talbot, for him, photography was first and foremost art, not evidence for science. Okay, this was his most famous work, exposed in Manchester in the middle 19th century, and this was Photoshop before it was mainstream. It's okay, it's a picture obtained by overimposing more than 32 photographs. Now, this guy gave Darwin a lot of images, and many often of himself. Look at his pictures here. And he claimed openly in the letters that he assume the pose expression that he will to do. Now, why am I stressing this thing about the pose expression? Because one of the main concern of psychologists today is that some pose expression are presented as if they are representative of spontaneous expression. But the truth is that since Darwin, they have a long tradition of being uh, posed on purpose. So it's unclear if their alleged unmediated link with the spontaneous genuine expression is safe. It's okay. Again, this baby, this looks like a photograph. If you don't look at it carefully, this really much looks like a photograph. Okay, and the truth is that it was drawn. So these what happens here is that by using photographs, Darwin is prompting us to think that many stuff are unmediated, that he was representing truth, okay, objective facts. But in many cases, these objective facts were very late theory laden, were very mediated by subjective interventions. And this is still a problem nowadays. Massimo, please, how much time do I have left? Like 10 minutes or less?
4 minutes.
Okay, so jump to contemporary database. You all know that nowadays psychologists study facial impressions. That is, faces can say a lot of things, identity, emotion. Some of these things are highly interrelated. For instance, you think that I'm trustworthy if I am dominant, I look strong and positively, emotionally positive. And this only happens though if I am a man, because there are different mixes and formula working on for women. These impressions are studied not in order to grasp something essential from the face, but still they are the prejudice that we form. We're natural born physiognomists, so to speak, and we can't help forming this impression. It's okay. So if you want to run an experiment, you cannot use a real subject. You cannot fit a real face into an fMRI scanner or 1,000 faces that you will need. You use photographs because photographs can be displaced because they are spatially agnostic and fixed in time. So the stimulus you are exposing many subjects to is stable, okay? Photographs can stabilize a phenomena they wish to make observable, okay? But sometimes you can also make thousands of photographs, but a cheaper way to do your experiment is to use scientific databases of faces. Last thing I want to say is how they are made of. They are made of several faces that you can download if you agree with the agreement after you make the request. And there are normative data, more important, attached to these faces. That is three kinds of normative data. First, demographics about the person depicted in this face photograph. Second, the ratings that some rater gave according, like responding to questions like, how boring does this face look? How catchy? How cold? How confident and attractive? And this varies depending on the database, and sometimes also physical objective measure, for instance, of the distance between eyes and so on and so forth. Also, there is a paper explaining what's the procedure to collect this data and the rationale. Nice thing, you can take these pictures, as we did, thanks to Roberto, and personalize them, adding your stuff. There are plenty of facial database. Here I presented three, but that's not very relevant now. And they present many advantages because they are cheaper. You can compare it to previous usage. They are very much embody the ideal of cumulative science, but they have a series of features that we will discuss in a future occasion. The only thing I wanna, when I jump to the conclusion, sorry for this mistiming, I want to emphasize just one thing. Just give a brief look at the list of issues about these face databases, and they can all be made, so to speak, summarized in the continuum, in the difficulty to stand on the continuum that I described below, because you want faces to be stable, neutral, and as more, well, as more controllable. You want control over what stimulus you're using in science. But on the other end, the more control you have, like building an artificial face with an avatar, or by doing something like this, you lose representativity. So researchers has to struggle in this continuum between artificial and naturalness. Okay, and as Darwin teaches us, it's if we read also Protger's forward, the 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 point where you stand is not always as transparent as you would like, because sometimes face and expression depicted in face might look very natural but can be very artifactual. So being a good scientist also means to be very transparent and aware about how much and what kind of artificiality stands in your face. These are more or less my thoughts that I want to share. And so thank you